It was a beautiful evening in the city, the kind of night when the air feels cool but not too cold, and the lights from the buildings sparkle like stars. The venue for the party was grand, large chandeliers, soft music playing in the background, and the soft clink of glasses as people mingled. The room was filled with laughter, quiet conversations, and the occasional burst of loud laughter from a group that had obviously known each other for years. It was the kind of event that could make anyone feel out of place if they weren't used to this kind of crowd. For most of the people there, it was a night to unwind. For her, it was something she dreaded. She had never liked these high society gatherings, where people seemed more interested in showing off their designer clothes and expensive jewelry than actually getting to know each other. She preferred quiet nights, good books, or even just a cup of coffee at a corner cafe, where things felt simpler and more real. But tonight was different. She had agreed to attend the party on the insistence of a close friend, who said it would be good for her career. "You need to network, meet new people," her friend had said. And so, reluctantly, she had come. She stepped inside the venue, adjusting the hem of her dress and taking a deep breath. The glittering lights and the hum of conversations made her feel like an outsider. She knew a few faces here, but not many. The people who did recognize her offered polite smiles, and she returned them, not wanting to make a scene. She took a glass of wine from a passing waiter, trying to calm her nerves. As she scanned the room looking for someone familiar, her heart suddenly dropped. Across the room, standing with a group of well-dressed people, was him, her ex, the man she had tried so hard to move on from, the man who had hurt her more than she liked to admit, the man who had made her feel like she wasn't good enough for so long. Her breath caught in her throat and her mind went blank. It felt as if time had stopped. She knew she couldn't escape now. There was no way she could leave the party without making it obvious that something was wrong. And yet the last thing she wanted was to face him, especially not tonight. She had heard he would be here, but she hadn't prepared for it. She hadn't prepared for the way her chest tightened when she saw him. Even after everything, even after the months of trying to forget him, he still had the ability to make her feel small. She quickly turned away, looking for a way to hide or escape, but the room was packed. There was no clear exit, and she couldn't bear the thought of running away, not again, not after everything that had already happened. She tried to steady herself, breathing slowly. It had been a while since they'd last spoken, and she had told herself that she was fine, that she had moved on. But seeing him now, looking just as confident and smug as always, made everything she had worked on in the last few months feel like it didn't matter. She needed a way out, a distraction, anything to avoid a confrontation. And that's when she saw him. He was standing by the bar, not too far away. He wasn't looking at her, but she could tell he was alone. Tall, with a confident posture and dressed in a sleek black suit, he looked like he belonged there, though he didn't have the same air of arrogance that most of the people in the room had. His features were sharp, his eyes focused on something in the distance as though he was lost in thought. In that moment, she didn't care who he was. All she cared about was not having to face her ex. She made a quick decision and walked toward him, hoping he wouldn't notice her approach. "Excuse me," she said softly, trying to sound casual, though her voice felt shaky. "I know this might sound strange, but could you help me? I really need to avoid someone, and I don't want to cause a scene." The man turned to face her, his expression neutral at first, but his eyes softened when he saw the worry on her face. He didn't say anything at first, just nodded in understanding. There was something about him, something calm and unbothered that made her feel like she could trust him. "Of course," he said after a moment. "Don't worry about it. Just stand by me for a bit. I won't let anyone bother you." Relief washed over her. She felt silly for not thinking of this earlier, but now, with him standing next to her, she felt safer. She couldn't tell what kind of man he was, whether he was kind or arrogant, but for now it didn't matter. He was a distraction, and that was exactly what she needed. They stood together, quietly watching the crowd. She could feel the weight of her ex's gaze on her from across the room, but it didn't matter now. The stranger, this man who she didn't even know, had given her a shield, even if it was just for a moment. He didn't ask questions, didn't push her to explain herself. He simply stood there with her, his presence enough to keep her calm. His easy smile and the quiet way he held himself made her feel a little less out of place in this crowded, fancy room. For the first time in what felt like hours, she could breathe again. The tension in her shoulders started to ease. She wasn't facing her ex. She wasn't alone. And for now, that was enough. The music played on, and the people around them continued their conversations. But for her, the world seemed a little quieter, a little safer. She turned slightly toward the man, giving him a small smile. "Thank you," she said softly. He glanced at her, and for the first time, she noticed how his eyes seemed to light up when he smiled back. It wasn't forced or rehearsed. It was just genuine. "No problem," he said, his voice smooth but not too formal. "I'm happy to help." They didn't speak much after that, but it didn't feel awkward. They just stood there side by side, a kind of unspoken understanding between them. Her ex, she noticed, had begun speaking to a group of people, his attention no longer on her. She could finally relax. For a moment, she could pretend that everything was fine, that the past was behind her, and maybe, just maybe, she could enjoy the night without worrying about what might come next. After standing beside him for a few moments, the tension in her chest finally began to fade. The nerves that had been building up since she walked into the party seemed to dissolve with each passing minute. She was still aware of the group of people across the room, but they felt a little less intimidating now. The eyes that had been locked on her, full of judgment and curiosity, no longer seemed to matter. For a while, the man beside her didn't say much. He simply stood with a quiet, calm presence, and that was enough. There was something reassuring about him, something that made her feel like she didn't need to explain herself. Maybe it was the way he didn't ask her questions or try to make small talk. He just respected her space. After a while, he glanced at her with an easy smile. "Do you come to many of these kinds of parties?" he asked. His voice wasn't forceful or overly polite, but gentle. It felt like he was genuinely curious. She hesitated before responding. The last thing she wanted to do was get into a deep conversation. But there was something about him that made her want to open up, even just a little. She took a small sip of her wine before answering. "No," she said softly. "Not really my scene. I prefer quieter places." "Yeah, I get that," he said, nodding thoughtfully. "I don't do these kinds of parties often either. But sometimes it's just part of the job." She raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Job?" "Yeah," he replied, his tone light but with a hint of mystery. "I'm in business. Lots of networking, you know? These events can be pretty useful, though they're not exactly fun." She smiled, relieved to hear him say that. She didn't feel so out of place anymore. "I'm not exactly the networking type," she admitted. "I'd rather just talk to a few people I actually know." "I can understand that," he said, his eyes glancing around the room. "But you'd be surprised how many connections you can make in places like this, even if you don't plan on it." She nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure what he meant. She wasn't in a position to network. She worked a simple job at a local bookstore, spending her days surrounded by words instead of people. Still, there was something comforting about hearing him speak so casually. He didn't seem like the type of person who would judge her for her modest life. That alone made her feel more at ease. The music continued to play, a soft jazz melody that seemed to echo in the background of the bustling party. The crowd around them had started to change, some people leaving while others made their way in. But for the moment, it was just the two of them, standing at the edge of the room, quietly observing the scene. "I guess we're both not fans of small talk," he said after a while, smiling as he looked at her. She couldn't help but chuckle. "Yes, I'm more of a straight-to-the-point kind of person." He grinned, a warm, genuine expression that made his face seem even more approachable. "I can appreciate that," he said, taking a sip of his own drink. "I'm the same way. Sometimes it's just better to be honest than to pretend." There was something about him that felt different from the other people in the room. While the others were busy trying to impress each other with their latest achievements or expensive tastes, this man wasn't interested in proving anything. He didn't seem to care about status or appearances. That was refreshing. "So what's your story?" he asked, turning his body slightly toward her. "You mentioned you don't like these kinds of parties. But what do you do when you're not trying to avoid your ex?" His question caught her off guard, and for a second she didn't know how to respond. It wasn't that she didn't have an answer. was just that it had been a long time since anyone had asked her about herself without some hidden agenda. Most people only ever asked to make small talk or figure out what they could gain from the conversation. But he wasn't like that. He was asking because he genuinely wanted to know. "I work at a bookstore," she said, her voice soft. "It's not glamorous, but I love it. I get to be surrounded by books all day, and I'm good at it. I don't mind the quiet." "A bookstore," he repeated, his tone thoughtful. "That sounds nice. There's something peaceful about being in a place filled with books. It's like everything slows down, you know?" She smiled, relieved by his understanding. "Exactly. It's the kind of place where you don't have to pretend. People come in, they browse, they talk about their favorite books, and then they leave. It's simple," he nodded. "That sounds perfect, honestly. I think I'd like that. I can't remember the last time I spent a whole day without a million things on my mind." "Sounds exhausting," she replied, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I imagine you're busy all the time." "Pretty much," he said with a shrug. But there was no frustration in his voice, only acceptance. "But I guess that's what happens when you're trying to build something. Sometimes it's hard to escape all the noise." She could tell that he was being honest with her, but there was something mysterious about him. He didn't offer too many details about his life, and when he spoke about his work, it was vague. It wasn't that he was being secretive. It was more like he didn't feel the need to explain himself, and that made him all the more intriguing to her. "You don't seem like the type to boast," she said after a moment, studying his expression. "Most people here are too busy talking about their successes, but you don't even seem interested." He looked at her, his eyes holding a quiet amusement. "I guess I'm just not into all that. I've seen enough of it to last a lifetime." They shared a small laugh, and for the first time since the party began, she felt like she could actually relax. There was something grounding about his presence, something real. He wasn't pretending to be someone he wasn't, and for her that was a breath of fresh air. As they continued to talk, the conversation flowed naturally. She found herself telling him more about her life, her job, and the small dream she had of one day traveling the world. He listened carefully, never interrupting, always encouraging her to keep going. It felt good to be heard, to speak freely without the weight of judgment. It wasn't until she looked at the clock that she realized how much time had passed. The party had started to wind down, and the crowd had thinned out a bit. She glanced around the room, still feeling a little out of place, but now it wasn't as overwhelming. She turned to him. "I should probably go," she said, not sure why she felt the need to leave. Maybe it was because the night had gone better than she'd expected, or maybe it was because she wasn't sure how much longer she could avoid running into her ex. He raised an eyebrow. "Leaving already?" he asked, sounding surprised but not disappointed. She nodded. "Yeah, it's been a strange night." He smiled, his eyes softening. "I understand. But before you go, let me ask you something." "Sure," she said, surprised by the sudden shift in his tone. "Would you like to get a coffee sometime?" he asked, his voice calm and steady. She blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. "A coffee?" he nodded. "I know we just met, but I'd like to talk more. I think you're someone I'd enjoy getting to know." She hesitated. She wasn't sure if she was ready for anything more than the fleeting connection they had shared tonight, but there was something about him, something that made her want to say yes. "I'd like that," she finally said, her voice quieter than usual. He smiled, his eyes lighting up in a way that made her feel like she had made the right decision. And with that, the night began to shift from one of discomfort to something she could look forward to. The days after the party passed in a blur. She couldn't stop thinking about the man she had met that night. It wasn't just his quiet charm or the way he had made her feel comfortable in an uncomfortable situation. There was something else about him, something that made her want to learn more, but she reminded herself it was just a one-time thing. He was just a stranger after all, a kind one, but still a stranger. Her mind would often wander back to their brief conversation at the party. His calm presence had been a welcome change from the usual chaos she had to deal with. Most people were all about appearances, about climbing the social ladder, but he had shown none of that. It was as though he didn't care about what others thought, and that intrigued her. It was rare to find someone who didn't seem like they were constantly measuring everyone against some invisible standard. She had agreed to meet him for coffee, but she hadn't expected to feel as nervous as she did when the day finally came. It wasn't that she didn't want to go. It was just that part of her still wasn't sure if this was a good idea. She didn't know what he wanted, or if he was just being polite. She didn't know if it was a friendship he was after or something more, but curiosity won out. She had never been the type to shy away from new experiences, even if they made her nervous. The coffee shop was small and quiet, a cozy corner with mismatched chairs and an old jukebox playing softly in the background. It felt like a place that hadn't changed in years, which was exactly why she liked it. She had arrived early, wanting to make sure she didn't keep him waiting. As she stepped inside, the warm smell of roasted coffee beans wrapped around her, calming her nerves. She ordered her usual, a simple cappuccino, and sat down at a table near the window, glancing out at the busy street. Minutes later, she spotted him walking through the door. He looked just as calm and composed as he had the other night, but there was a small smile on his face when he saw her. He walked over to her table and she stood up to greet him. "Hey," he said, his voice as relaxed as always. "I hope I'm not too late." "No, you're fine," she replied, smiling as she motioned for him to sit down. "I just got here a few minutes ago." He sat down, and for a moment neither of them spoke. It wasn't awkward. It was more like they were just enjoying the simplicity of the moment. He seemed just as comfortable in the quiet space as she did. After a few moments, he leaned back in his chair and looked at her with a soft smile. "So how's life been since that crazy party?" he asked, his tone light, but there was a genuine curiosity behind his words. She laughed a little, relieved that he didn't try to make small talk about business or the weather. "Honestly, it's been pretty normal. Just work, you know? The usual." "Yeah," he said, nodding. "I get that. I think I'm in the same boat, just trying to keep things balanced." She noticed that he didn't elaborate. He wasn't offering any details about what exactly he did, and part of her wondered why. Was it because he didn't want to talk about it? Or was he trying to keep things casual? "So tell me more about you," he said, leaning forward slightly. "You said you work at a bookstore. What's that like?" She smiled, happy to talk about something she enjoyed. "It's great.
I mean, it's not anything flashy, but I love being around books."
People come in, they talk about what they're reading, and I get to recommend new things. It's a quiet place, which I love. I get to read on my breaks too, which is always a bonus." "That sounds perfect," he said, his eyes lighting up as he listened. "I'm not much of a reader myself, but I can see why you like it. There's something calming about being surrounded by stories." She nodded. "Exactly. It's like you get to escape for a little while, even if you're not the one doing the reading. So what's the dream? What do you want to do with your life?" he asked, his question gentle but direct. She hesitated. She hadn't really thought about her dream in a long time. It wasn't that she didn't have ambitions, it was just that life had been so busy, and she had gotten used to just taking things one day at a time. "I'm not really sure," she admitted. "I guess I've always wanted to travel, see more of the world, experience different cultures, things like that. But it's always been a someday kind of thing." He looked thoughtful, his gaze distant for a moment. "Someday can be a long time coming," he said quietly. "If you wait for the perfect moment, you might end up waiting forever." His words struck her in a way she hadn't expected. She had always dreamed of traveling, but she had also always found excuses not to go. She had told herself that she would go when the time was right, but maybe he was right. Maybe that perfect moment would never come. Maybe she needed to make the moment happen. Before she could respond, the barista brought over their drinks. She thanked him, and the conversation shifted back to something lighter. They talked about their favorite books, their favorite places to eat in the city, and how they both hated waking up early for work. It felt easy, like they had known each other for longer than just a few days. As they drank their coffee, she noticed that time seemed to move slower. In a good way. With him, it was like the world outside didn't matter. It was just the two of them, enjoying each other's company. She wasn't worried about what would happen next, and that was a new feeling for her. She had always been the type to overthink everything, to worry about what people would think or what could go wrong. But with him, it was different. He wasn't pushing for anything, wasn't trying to make her feel uncomfortable or pressured. He just let things unfold naturally. "So," he said after a while, breaking the comfortable silence between them, "I've been meaning to ask you something." She raised an eyebrow, curious. "What's that? Why did you come to the party in the first place?" he asked, his voice gentle but still curious. She blinked, taken aback by the question. It wasn't something she had thought about much, but now that he asked, She realized that she had gone to that party because she felt like she should, like it was the right thing to do. But deep down she knew she had only agreed to go because her friend had pushed her into it. "I don't know," she said with a small shrug. "I guess I went because I didn't want to miss out on something. But honestly, I wasn't looking forward to it. I wasn't in the mood for it, you know?" He nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "I get that. Sometimes we do things just because we feel like we have to, but it's not always what we really want." She sighed, a little relieved that he understood. "Exactly. It was like, I was just going through the motions." "Well, I'm glad you decided to show up anyway," he said, his voice warm. "It's not every day I get to meet someone who's willing to admit when they don't like something." She laughed softly. "Yeah, I guess I'm not great at pretending." He smiled, his expression softening. "I like that about you. It's refreshing." For a moment, neither of them said anything. It wasn't awkward, though. It was like they were both content in that quiet, comfortable space. And as she sat there, she realized that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a random encounter after all. There was something about him. Something that made her feel like there was more to this moment than just two people having coffee. She had come into the coffee shop expecting nothing more than a simple, casual meeting. But now she couldn't help but wonder if this was the start of something unexpected. The days following their coffee meeting were filled with a sense of anticipation. She couldn't quite explain it, but there was something different about the way she felt whenever she thought about him. It wasn't just the fact that he was charming or easy to talk to. It was the way he made her feel like she mattered. It was a subtle, quiet feeling, but it was there and it was new to her. For the first time in a long time, she found herself looking forward to something. She didn't know exactly what it was or where this would go, but she wasn't going to shy away from it. He had a way of making her feel like she didn't need to put on a mask. With him, there was no need for pretenses, and that was rare. Their conversations continued over the next few weeks, each one leaving her feeling more connected to him than the last. They talked about everything and nothing, about the places they had been, the dreams they had, the silly little things that made them laugh. She found herself sharing parts of her life she hadn't thought about in years, and he did the same. There was something incredibly easy about their connection, something that made time seem to slip by unnoticed. One afternoon, they met again at the same cozy coffee shop. She had arrived a little early as usual and was sitting by the window, watching the world go by. It had become a ritual for her, this quiet moment before he arrived when she could gather her thoughts and just enjoy the calm. Today, however, she felt a little nervous. She wasn't sure why, but there was an edge to her excitement. Maybe it was because their conversations had been getting deeper. Or maybe it was because she had started to realize that she was growing more and more fond of him. When he walked through the door, as usual, there was that small, easy smile on his face, and everything inside her seemed to settle. She stood up, waving at him. "Hey," she said, her voice light. "You made it on time today." "Wouldn't miss it," he replied, his smile widening as he reached her table. They exchanged a few pleasantries before sitting down, and once again, the easy flow of conversation took over. It was almost as if they had known each other for years, the way they could talk without feeling the weight of awkward silences. It was a gift that she had learned to appreciate, especially in a world where most interactions felt rushed and forced. They talked about books, the latest movies they had seen, and even their childhoods. As she listened to him share small details about his life, she couldn't help but notice how carefully he spoke, how deliberate he was with his words. He didn't talk about his work much, but there was no denying that he was someone who had achieved a lot. He wasn't boastful, but there was a quiet confidence about him, the kind that came from experience, from having built something from the ground up. At one point, he paused, looking out the window for a moment. "I think sometimes we forget how much we take for granted," he said softly, almost to himself. She glanced at him, intrigued. "What do you mean?" He looked back at her, his eyes thoughtful. "I mean the little things, the things that seem small but end up being the most important. We're always looking ahead, chasing something bigger, and in doing so, we miss out on what's right in front of us." She absorbed his words, feeling a pang of recognition. It was something she had been thinking about lately, the way she had been living her life, always waiting for the next big moment, the next opportunity. She had been so focused on the future that she had forgotten to enjoy the present. "I think I get what you're saying," she said, her voice quieter now. I've always been that way, always looking ahead, but maybe there's something to be said for just living in the moment. He nodded, his gaze steady. Exactly. Sometimes you don't realize what you have until it's gone, and then all you're left with are regrets. She felt a shiver run through her at the weight of his words. It was as if he had somehow understood the quiet fear that had been lingering inside her, the fear that she had missed out on something important by always chasing after something else. The conversation shifted, but the moment lingered in the air, heavy and introspective. They continued talking about lighter topics, but there was an unspoken understanding between them now. It was as if they had both realized something about themselves, something they hadn't been willing to admit until now. As the afternoon wore on, she felt a growing sense of connection to him. She wasn't sure if it was just the conversations they had shared, or if it was something more, but there was no denying that something had shifted between them. She had never expected to feel this way about someone she had only just met, but now it seemed almost impossible to ignore. After they finished their drinks, they stood up, both of them a little reluctant to leave. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow over everything, and for a brief moment it felt as if the world had slowed down just for them. "Do you ever think about the future?" she asked, her voice soft. He paused, looking at her thoughtfully. "All the time," he said. "But I've learned that it's not always about where you're going. It's about who you're with along the way." Her heart skipped a beat. There was something about the way he said it, something that made her feel like she was part of something bigger, something real. It wasn't a grand gesture or a promise, but it was enough to make her feel like this moment mattered. As they stepped outside, the cool breeze brushed against her face, and she took a deep breath. It was a beautiful day, and for the first time in a long time she felt truly at peace. She didn't know what the future held, but she was beginning to understand that maybe it wasn't the destination that mattered. Maybe it was the journey. They exchanged a few words before parting ways, but as she walked down the street, she couldn't shake the feeling that something important had just happened. It was subtle, quiet, but it was there, and for the first time in a while, she wasn't afraid of what was to come. The weeks after their last coffee meeting passed quickly, though for her, time seemed to move slower whenever she thought about him. Their conversations continued, each one more open and honest than the last. They'd talk about everything: life, dreams, fears, even the things that made them feel vulnerable. She felt like she was getting to know him in a way that few people ever truly got to know each other, but at the same time there was still so much she didn't know. There were still gaps, still pieces of his life that remained just out of reach, and that left her with a sense of curiosity she couldn't ignore. She had never been one to pry, but the more time they spent together, the more she found herself wanting to understand who he really was. There was something enigmatic about him, a quiet confidence that made her wonder what kind of life he had led to get to this point. One evening, they met at a small park near her apartment. It was one of those peaceful spots, tucked away from the noise of the city, where the trees created a canopy of shade and the soft sounds of nature filled the air. She liked coming here when she needed to clear her head, and she'd invited him to join her for a walk. He arrived a few minutes early, and when she saw him standing by the entrance, she couldn't help but smile. There was something comforting about his presence, as though everything in the world could be put on hold for a while when he was around. "Hey," he said as she approached, his usual warm smile on his face. "Hi," she replied, smiling back. "I'm glad you could make it." "Wouldn't miss it," he said, offering her his arm, which she took with a laugh. They started walking down the path, the evening sun casting long shadows on the ground. For a while they walked in comfortable silence. The only sounds were the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze and their footsteps on the gravel path. She loved moments like this, quiet, simple, where there was no pressure to fill the air with words. Finally, he broke the silence. "You know, I've been thinking about what you said the other day," he began, his voice soft but steady. "About living in the moment." She glanced up at him, surprised. "Really?" He nodded, his eyes ahead as they walked. "Yeah, it's something I've always known but never really thought about. I've been so focused on building something, on looking ahead, that I've forgotten to just be." She felt a pang of understanding. He had always seemed so composed, so sure of himself, but now she could see a different side of him, the side that questioned things, the side that wondered if he had missed out on moments in his life by chasing something else. "I get that," she said softly. "I've always been looking for the next thing, too. The next step, but I think I'm starting to see how much I've overlooked." They walked for a few more minutes, and for once she didn't feel the need to say anything. They were simply two people walking side by side, sharing an unspoken understanding. It was a rare kind of connection, and she felt grateful for it. Eventually, they reached a bench under a large oak tree. They sat down, and for a while they just watched the sun dip lower in the sky, casting an orange glow over everything. The moment was peaceful, and it was easy to lose track of time in its simplicity. "I've been meaning to ask you something," he said after a while, his voice breaking the quiet. She turned to look at him, curious. "What's that?" He hesitated for a moment before speaking. "What's been holding you back from going after what you really want?" The question caught her off guard. She had always thought of herself as someone who was content with her life. But when she really thought about it, she realized there were a lot of things she had put off, things she had been too scared to pursue. Dreams, goals, even the little things that had always made her happy. She had put them on hold for reasons she couldn't quite explain. I think I've been afraid of failing," she said, her voice quiet. "I've always wanted to travel, to see the world, but I've always told myself I couldn't, that it wasn't practical, that I needed to focus on work, on what made sense." He looked at her with a thoughtful expression, his eyes steady. "What if you didn't have to wait for the perfect moment? What if you just went for it even if it wasn't perfect?" Her heart skipped a beat. The way he said it, it wasn't just about travel or dreams. It felt like he was talking about life in general, about not letting fear hold her back from the things that mattered. She had been so wrapped up in playing it safe and doing what she thought was expected of her, that she had forgotten how to take risks. "I don't know," she said softly, looking down at her hands. "It's hard to let go of the fear, to just go for something without knowing what might happen." He reached over and placed a hand on hers, his touch warm and steady. "I know it's not easy, but sometimes it's the risks that are worth taking, even if you don't know how things will turn out. You might find something you never expected." She looked up at him, surprised by the intensity in his gaze. There was something so genuine in the way he spoke, something that made her believe in the possibility of taking that leap. She had always been so afraid of the unknown, but sitting here with him, she started to wonder if maybe it was time to stop holding herself back. They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the rustling of the leaves above them. It felt like the world had slowed down for just a moment, and in that moment she realized something. She had spent so much time wondering what her life should look like, what was expected of her, that she had forgotten to listen to her own heart. Maybe it was time to start living for herself, to take chances, to stop waiting for the perfect moment. "I think you're right," she said, her voice softer now. "Maybe I've been holding myself back more than I realized." He smiled, the warmth in his eyes making her feel like she wasn't alone in this realization. It's never easy to take that first step, but sometimes it's the hardest things that bring the best results. They both stood up from the bench, the sun now dipping below the horizon. The sky was painted with shades of pink and purple, and for a moment, the world felt like it was holding its breath. "Thank you," she said quietly, looking up at him. He smiled again, that same quiet confidence in his expression. "For what?" "For making me see that maybe I don't have to wait anymore, that I can just go for it." He gave a small, almost teasing shrug. "I'm just here to help you see what's already inside you." She smiled back, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that whatever it was, she didn't have to face it alone. There was someone by her side now, someone who saw the potential in her that she had forgotten to see in herself. As they walked back down the path, side by side, she realized that maybe the journey wasn't about having everything figured out. Maybe it was about taking each step, trusting that the next one would lead her to where she needed to go. And for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to take that step.